Welcome back, and I'm still on the case of the Charlotte Dujardin abuse Olympics, and I have a couple of stories from the Telegraph newspaper. I have to hand it to the reporter because they're following this very closely, and for the first story they've interviewed Carl Hester about what it was like to compete without their strongest rider or their strongest medal hopes during the games. Team GB's dressage riders block out Dujardin noise to take team bronze at Paris 2024. On Sunday, all three of the British team, Becky, Moody, Carl Hester and Charlotte Fry, go in the individual event, for which they won bronze. For Carl Hester and the dressage team, this was the best riposte. All week their sport had been under the most intense scrutiny. Its finest practitioner, Charlotte Dujardin, not anymore, had been removed from Olympic competition after a video surfaced of her abusing a horse. Ever since, a deafening noise has built around the sport, the suspicion growing that this was not an isolated incident, that this is a sport based on forcing horses to do things they do not want to do. Here, by way of answer, was a bronze medal in the team event, delivered via collective performance of grace, style, and panache, and without a whip in sight. Personally, I feel that Carl Hester and Becky Moody deserved the highest scores in the qualification phase of the competition. Jessica von Bredow-Werndl scored 82.065%, which was the winning score for the individual qualifier, where riders performed the same test to go through to the final with individual freestyle performances to win individual and team medals. Becky Moody scored 74.938%, which is 7% behind the winning score, to rank 8th. And Carl Hester, 77.345%, to rank 14th, and some 5% behind the winning score. And that was 1.6% behind the other Team GB member, Charlotte Fry. I considered that overall, Carl and Becky's horses performed much more in keeping with my interpretation of the FEI rules of training and requirements for classical dressage compared with the highest score. I've placed all three riders in split screen, showing most of the movements to evidence my opinion. So it's not the full test, it's most of it, where I've got the same camera angles. But first, let me refer you to several of the elements of the FEI training scale so that you can follow what I'm basing my opinion on. Suppleness, which is elasticity and freedom from anxiety. The movement cannot be considered correct unless the horse is working through its back and the muscles are free from tension. Only if the horse is physically and mentally free from tension or anxiety or constraint can it work with suppleness and use itself fully. The horse should convey the impression that it is putting its whole mind and body into its work. Indications of suppleness are, and I'm going to be looking at a swinging back with the tail carried in a relaxed manner. I'll be looking at contact, which is stated as acceptance of the bit, and aids, which means self-carriage. The horse should go rhythmically forward from the rider's driving aids and seek contact with the rider's hand, thus going into the contact. So my interpretation of that is that there should be no backward hand restraint. Indications of good contact are the horse steps forward to the bit through a straight and supple pole. The pole is the highest point. The line of the nose is in front of the vertical, and in highly collected exercises, at the vertical. The frame should never be compressed. Judges should always differentiate between nose behind the vertical, which may be a symptom of long-term incorrect training. So with this being all about harmony, they're stating here that nose behind the vertical reflects long-term incorrect training. Impulsion. The most important criteria of impulsion is the time the horse spends in the air rather than on the ground. And for this, they want to see a supple and swinging back. Impulsion allows the horse to move in a powerful and athletic way and to show elastic and expressive movement. This is where I think it gets rather shady. The athleticism and the expressive movement. Firstly, I need to mention about copyright. The use of this footage is in compliance with fair use for the purposes of educational comparison and analysis. Some more context. Jessica's horse is a veteran 17 years of age, and Jessica is the reigning Olympic champion. Becky's horse is a relative youngster at 10 years of age, and Carl's horse is 14. So the first move, they entered at A up the centre line in passage. And what you can see here is a fairly comparable performance with some, what I see as a head tilt in Jessica's horse, whereas there's more of a bend in Becky's horse, and Carl's horse looks to me to be more vertical than tilting. I think Carl's horse should score the highest here, but just let's go back because we want to see some good lifting in the passage. And let's see if his horse lifts. Sorry about this. The riders are actually different sizes because of the zooming of the camera at the competition. But let's have a look at the athleticism here as we look at the passage from the front. And I think where Becky's horse has a rolling action and Carl's horse is very vertical, I think Jessica has the edge here. Let's go back and check that again. I just see Carl's horse as being more athletic. There's no energy wasted from any sway there. And as I mentioned earlier, as they turn the corner, this head tilt concerns me. This is very good from Becky, and this is even better from Carl. But all three have elasticity. All three appear to be free from anxiety. But for me, the classical dressage move would be represented by Carl. But get here also that they may lose points for accuracy, straightness. If you recall that Becky's horse was rotating. And of course, there's 6 judges placed around the arena, so they don't all see the same thing. But what we see now is pretty much what the judges see as the riders enter the arena. The rest of this is from the camera operator's perspective. Now we have trot. I'm looking at the back. To me, Becky's horse has good back mobility. And let me just put them at the same phase in the stride. So here, for example, and here, here. We can see as the horses move across the diagonal, Jessica's horse becomes behind the vertical. Carl's horse has also done the same, but Becky maintains a good pole high position. And the judges are looking to see less of a V shape made between the head and neck. So the problem I have with modern dressage is that the legs tend to compensate for lack of back mobility, so that what you see as expression and extravagance is leg moving. So here, this appears exaggerated, but what the leg mover appears to do is to create more vertical movement through the fetlock stretch recoil, so that yes, the back will move more vertically and be more fixed compared with Becky's horse, where you can see movement from the pelvis through the lumbar sacral joint, through the lumbar and on through the horse's body, but there is less protraction of the front limb. So if you look from here, they're almost in the same position here. And Jessica's horse moves with a very straight, protracted right fore. We're not entirely side on here, but the horse's knee is in front of the horse's head. Whereas for Becky, the horse's leg is flexed as it's protracted. The knee is not in front of the horse's muzzle. And although Carl's horse does not show as much forelimb extension, let's have a look at his maximum. Yeah, it's fully protracted as it makes ground contact. And again, yeah, the knee is, I wouldn't say in front of the head, but in terms of a frame, this is more classical to me. And this is more athletic in terms of a mobile back and limbs that are not going to hit the ground in full protraction. So yes, they all look elastic, but to me, the most athletic horse, as we look at them here, all in the same position, although Becky's horse has moved slightly behind the vertical. We can see how apparently hollow Carl's horse is here in the lumbar. I just think these saddles are fitted more further forward than they should be, although I'm happier with Becky's saddle. And if we look at rider position, it's almost as if Carl has a hollow back, mirroring that of the horse. Moving on. But in terms of the training scale, the least tense horse is Becky's, and the horse with the pole with the highest point is Becky's. So now the half pass. Yeah, and in this, all the horses are comparable. So they almost look identical in this. So not much to report there. They're all very good, except that when they make the turn, yeah, we have this head tilt again from Jessica's horse. Becky's horse bends fluently and consistently into the corner. And if we look at Carl, I think his horse is just a little less supple than Becky's horse, but more balanced. Looking at the pole being the highest point, Yeah, they're very comparable. The next move is a halt and rein back. So there's not a lot to see here, only the regularity. And now we have trot. Yeah, you just see how much Jessica's horse lifts the right front leg, whereas Becky's horse flexes gently until just before it makes contact with the ground. And Carl's horse, yeah, this is similar but not as pronounced as Jessica's horse. So which one, in terms of classical dressage, which horse is correct? To me, it's Becky's horse because of the fluidity of the movement and the swinging back. The other two horses just appear to be using their legs more than their backs. Look at that again in slow motion. Just look at the back movement. Look how much Jessica's horse's front legs are protracted. Carl's horse hollow in the back. Jessica's horse behind the vertical. Becky's horse, no obvious tension there. And let's look closely at the steps, looking for elasticity. It's quite interesting to look at how much elevation there is by looking at the horse's ventral rib cage rather than the legs. And for this movement, I can see that Jessica's horse has more vertical displacement. Have a look at that again. So is more athletic, but I don't like that behind the vertical look. Carl's horse looks more collected, not so hollow this time. And Becky's horse, this to me just looks like a great neck. Not quite as high at the pole, so therefore Carl's horse wins this one. But the elasticity is impressive of Becky's horse, but the lift of Jessica's horse and also of Carl's horse is impressive. Now we have walk. So again, I'm looking for the back movement, which should be quite obvious. So working through the back, muscles free from tension, excess tension, I would say. In this movement, I could see a good mobilized back in Jessica's horse. Look at that again. Yeah, the horse really sits down in that walk. Let's look again. Whereas I couldn't really see much that was notable or remarkable in the other two horses. So you really want the horse to sit down, elastic, supple. Yeah, and Becky's and Carl's horse for this move just doesn't quite have the suppleness of Jessica's horse. So looking behind the saddle. And slow motion. Yeah, you can really see Jessica's horse, how much this horse moves in walk or mobilizes in walk. But in terms of contact, I saw Becky's horse moving rhythmically forward to seek the contact, thus going into the contact. This is what's written in the rules. Yeah, there's much more of a natural walking reach in Becky's horse compared with Jessica's horse, which tends to go over bent. Want to look at that again so that we can see what Carl's horse is doing? Yeah, and you can see how much Carl gives with the rein. But I think Becky's horse is softer. If you look at that in slow motion, what we want to see is some mobility of the cervicothoracic joint to get that reach. So the horse has to be mobile at the base of the neck to reach forward into the contact. Let's have a look here, here, and here in each of the horses. Okay, this horse tends to reach up and into the bit behind the vertical. Becky's horse moves up and out, showing a bit more elasticity, more extension in the head and neck. And Carl's horse, yeah, it's quite minimal compared with Becky's horse. So there is some reach, but not as much as Becky's horse. I'll just show you that again. And personally, in a walk, I want to see the whole body move, which in Jessica's horse, the lumbosacral spine is mobile, but less so the cervical spine. Whereas Carl's horse doesn't look to me to be a whole body movement. But he does lift through the withers, which to me is the most important sign of a horse's athleticism, because to me it indicates that the thoracic sling musculature is engaged and active, pushing the horse up and forwards. Next move, passage. Comparable, looking at that again. So impulsion, elasticity, suppleness, and the contact, a reaching contact, acceptance of the bit, rhythmically forward. I thought I saw some mouth opening on Jessica's horse. Let's see. Somewhat, yes, there is some movement there. So looking for athleticism, the horses need to show impulsion. I'm really liking Becky's horse's neck, slightly overbent for Carl and same for Jessica. But you can see there is just slightly more activity, athleticism in Jessica and Carl's horse compared with Becky's horse. But she does have the youngest horse, and it is nevertheless impressive. But elasticity and suppleness, yeah, more for these two horses compared with this one. But if the horse does have a tendency to have a hollow back, how much suppleness are we going to see? How much lift are we going to see? It's going to be reduced with a hollow back. Once more, look at the back. Yeah, but all three make a fairly comparable turn there. They're balanced, they're organised, they're vertical. Now some canter. Unfortunately, I didn't have the camera angle the same for Carl, so I've left it out, but we have a little bit of Carl's canter at the end of this. So they look very comparable. Can we say they're overbent? Probably not, because in this phase of the stride, the horses are moving down into the ground contact. So if we look at this, again, I just so like Becky's horse's neck here. Not quite in the same phase of the stride cycle, because Jessica's horse has made some ground contact here, whereas Becky's just about to. So let's just move back one. Yeah, I mean, also when the horse's ears are back, it always makes them look a little tense. But here you can see this horse does have a good upward jump to it and is not entirely behind the vertical, but as they move towards the ground, what I can see, even though Jessica is giving the rein here, two riders have their arms in slightly different positions and they're both giving, but this contact seems to have less acceptance than this one. And what can I see? Jessica's foot rotated outward. Maybe she's having to make contact with the spur here and the horse is backing off a little, whereas Becky's spur does not appear to have made contact here. But both lovely jump, and we can see some good lumbosacral action. We'll look at that again before Carl. So yes, both supple through the back, but I think Becky's horse has the better contact. Yeah, I can see spur contact here and none here. Good hands from Becky. The horse is reaching very slightly forwards, which is what we want to see, and very similar phases of the stride here. But I see Jessica's posture here as being more fixed compared with slightly more fluidity of Becky's posture. She just looks more open. Now let's look at see what Carl's doing. We're leaning back for some reason. Yeah, you can see almost the horse nodding backwards and forwards. So moving backwards from the vertical rather than remaining on the vertical with a slight movement just in front of it. Yeah, that's quite an interesting canter. So that didn't happen for either of these riders. Yeah, so you can see more of a U shape here that I was mentioning earlier. And these horses' heads do not move backwards during the stride, whereas for Carl, that does happen. Coming up now. Yeah, I do think his horse's back is more hollow and less mobile. than is desired. One more time. But I can see Carl leaning back more than the other two riders. And as much as he has very sympathetic hands, this horse just for some reason very slightly comes back to his hand rather than reaching forwards. But to be fair, I would have liked to have seen more canter strides. That's all I've got. And he was getting ready to turn there, where we saw much more of the canter for the other two riders. So now we have some tempi changes. One time. All three very comparable. Elasticity goes to Becky's horse. I don't like the tail swishing. I like how composed Carl's horse is. In terms of rider position, I think Carl shows the most precision and control here, and balance. Barely moving. Now we have turn. And now they continue to the corner to turn right. Very comparable. Very comparable. What can we see here that looks in slow motion? You see, it's difficult for the judges. They've got a number of components to mark here, and they've got to make a very fast decision. And when you run the film with them all together, moving in normal speed, it's not until you slow this down frame by frame that you see flashes of resistance, lack of acceptance of the bit, lack of suppleness. And this can change each time the horse's limbs make contact with the ground. But let's see what happens here. They've got a good jump to the canter. Quite why Jessica leans so far back here, I don't know. But each of the riders is inclined to be leaning back, but not to this degree. Again, we have some hollowing of the back here. Nothing to report there with Becky. But now we have Jessica sitting towards the back of the saddle. I think it all looks a bit dramatic for a canter. This looks a little tense to me, but still looking very classical from Becky. And as they make the turn, Carl in perfect balance, Becky too, and Jessica not quite as well organised. This horse seems to jump into the corner and lengthens here. This just looks very untidy. It just doesn't look elastic and supple. So this is Jessica having emerged from the corner, just not looking as organised as Becky and Carl. And next move, I believe, is extended canter into canter pirouette at the very end. Good impulsion, good ground covering, good length of stride, shortening, collecting into the corner and into the counter canter. So let's see what we can see here. Yeah, I think Jessica's horse looking particularly athletic here. And Becky, perhaps not quite the same degree of impulsion. Yeah, and what I noticed there, that they were required to do a flying change at the K marker. Let's look at that again. So for Jessica, she's demonstrating that she can move rapidly into a flying change from extended canter, yet maintaining balance. See, it's barely imperceptible. Coming up, next stride. Oh, she's leaning back a lot. Here, that's the change. So you look at that again from Jessica. Does she lean back all the way through this? She seems to lean back more into the flying change. And yeah, this horse is doing some mouth opening as she leans back. I would query the acceptance of the bit there, but it's a big ask going from extended canter to a flying change at the K marker, and her horse is protesting slightly there. The next stride will be the change here. So now let's look at Becky. Becky prepares well for this. So less impulsion to get the flying change. A well-organized flying change there. Watch that again. Her leg comes back as she asks for the flying change. I thought I saw her rotate slightly, so giving the aid with her body, but she remains more vertical. And the change is here. One more time. She asks for a change of leg here. Sits vertically, rotates in the upper body. And there's the change. Let's show you at the point of change. It's here. Just sitting so vertically here. And she's ready to take the horse around the corner in balance. Good acceptance of the rein. Good bend. Wonderful back mobility there into the canter pirouette. Now let's have a look at Carl. This will be effortless for Carl. Good impulsion, good elasticity, not quite as much opening and lengthening as Becky's horse, but perfect hands. And let's watch for him bringing his leg back to ask the horse for a change. The horse's back moves really well in the extended canter. And watch for his leg to come back. there. And the horse says, yep, I'm changing. Very well executed. Out of the 3 horses, Carl manages to get the impulsion along with an accurate change of leg. Beautiful. And which one's the more classical out of the 3? It's got to be Carl. Very much so. Even though in the canter his horse still comes back at him through the nose, he still manages to make this look perfect. So for this move, they have to zigzag across the long side of the arena. I saw quite a lot of leg movement in Jessica's horse. We can even see Jessica apparently leaning back here, whereas Becky and Carl are more vertical. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, okay. So Becky's horse leans for the change of leg and direction. Carl's just perfect, but I'm not so sure why all this leaning has to be done. Yeah, perhaps the horse is stiffer in one direction more than the other. I think this horse is generally a little anxious. Let's look at that one more time. Yeah. So, yeah, Jessica's horse did seem to have a good range there, but it was somewhat disorganized. A couple of strides of bend through the turn. Do I see a more mobile hind end there, or do I see lack of stability? Carl is very stable here. So is Becky. This just looks a bit hectic to me. We'll look at that again. Good bend from Carl. There. But what I'm seeing here, almost as if this horse is seeking more stability around the corner. Next, one-time tempi changes. And Jessica's horse looks very expressive here. But I think the more classical is Becky. I see anxiety creeping in to Jessica's horse. Mouth opening there. And Carl's horse. Just coming back a little with the contact. Whereas Becky's horse shows more acceptance. But I see Jessica's horse mouthing. So that to me indicates less acceptance of the bit. Now, canter pirouette. Just a couple of strides of this. Here's that head tilt again. Carl remains very vertical and balanced for this move. Becky's horse comparable with Jessica's, except I think the head carriage is more correct. These are at exactly the same point in the stride. Carl. Yeah, he does a good canter pirouette here. It's only a couple of strides, but there's a huge amount of quality there. So I think Carl's horse matches the athleticism of Jessica's horse, but Becky looks more composed, synchronized, stable. Extended trot. I really like the frame of Becky's horse here, although Carl's horse is more collected. So all three highly comparable, except there's some opening and closing of the mouth of Jessica's horse. Let's look at that again. Definitely. Becky's horse, pole not quite the highest point here for some reason, whereas Carl's horse is more collected, good acceptance of the bit here. This leg protraction or exaggerated leg protraction so that the knee is in front of the nose. I just think that's an aspect of modern dressage and potentially dressage horse breeding that is getting more and more further removed from what we know as classical dressage. Jessica's horse almost punches the air with the front limbs. It's like a whole new move. I'm much happier with Becky's forelimb movement, and Carl's horse shows some exaggerated protraction, but not to the extent of Jessica's horse. What I would say is that Carl's horse appears more comfortable here in that exaggerated movement compared with Jessica's. We have got some behind the vertical there with Becky, but let me know what you think in the comments. Which of these horses is more representative of classical dressage? Is modern dressage healthy athletic movement for the horse? Where should we be on this? As a veterinary physiotherapist, I'm much more accepting of Becky's horse's performance and gait than I am of Jessica's. I'd love to see Carl on Becky's horse because I think perhaps this horse is a little short in the back for him, but nevertheless, apart from some hollowing of the back at times, this is a pleasing combination for me compared with this one. And to finish, down the centre line, passage. I think for all three horses, the passage is comparable. But I think I like the degree of collection of Carl's horse for this move. So this looks more classical to me And this just looks slightly more work in progress, but this is the youngest horse. I can't wait to see this horse at the next Olympics. And they're just about to halt and salute. Let's look at that again. It's interesting because this is how they started this test. We have some rotation issues of the rib cage in Becky's horse, but she's the most accurate one here. If the center line is center of these two shrubs, she's the most central, right to her nose, down through the horse's nose as well. Whereas Carl's gone a little bit off course, and so has Jessica. Let's see how they recover to halt. Yes, we've got Becky with one hind limb abducted. So although she's straight on the center line, more or the most straight, the horse isn't. And what you see here is a good representation of how this subjective marking scheme is so problematic, because all combinations are not calibrated to move in exactly the same way. They are all showing varying degrees of loss of marks awarded for various components. And the horses are standing still here. So it's so much easier to comment on their marking. I would conclude that the judges have a very difficult time assessing what they see and then keeping their marks consistent throughout the day, from the first horse to the last. And this is all too subjective for me, as judging is done in real time with no appeal. My evaluation of these three horse and rider combinations, and I'm only going by what I see, and others may see performances in an entirely different perspective to mine, which is that of veterinary physiotherapy and healthy horse, healthy spinal and limb movement, rather than what modern dressage demands. But many are in agreement that modern dressage has lost its way, and these performances illustrate that very well. From what I see as a former dressage competitor and veterinary physiotherapist, I see the world's highest ranked horse and rider combination somewhat struggling with this test in terms of the gait expressiveness matching true athleticism, and the rider struggling to manage the horse's expressiveness. The rider ranking 8th, Becky Moody, with her homebred horse, apparently not prepared to compromise healthy horse movement to demonstrate greater gait expressiveness. And the rider ranking 13th with a horse that appears to conform to the modern expressive type, but with the rider applying what we know as classical dressage techniques, but I feel is unable to fully bring out the best in that horse for whatever reason. But to be fair, this horse was not trained over the longer term by Carl Hester, so he's not entirely responsible for that. It makes it almost impossible to mark these three performances on the spot without slow motion replay according to the suggested training scale. In my view, the best trained horse is Becky Moody's by a mile. I just hope that modern dressage can evolve sufficiently to recognise it and award healthy gait above expressive gait. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. My next dressage performance video will pitch Jessica with the rider scoring the least marks in that phase of the competition. I promise you that will be interesting. In the meantime, let's get back to the news article. "You feel like the world is watching you," said Hester, for whom this was the 7th Olympics of his now 35-year sporting career. And he's the one that deserves to be recognised as its finest practitioner, in my eyes. It's been a week of very different emotions. This is a fantastic way to top it. And what I'm also going to be looking at is the potential that Charlotte Dujardin had for winning gold for the team in Paris, because I think there's some hype there. Each of the 10 teams consisted of 3 riders. So here they describe the setting and the ambiance of the dressage phase. First off for Britain was Becky Moody. 10 days ago, she had been expecting to be on holiday in France right now. Instead, Dujardin had self-immolated, and at the age of 44, here she was, the substitute rider, making her Olympic debut. Oh, this is just the stuff that dreams are made of. There have definitely been moments of complete nausea, she said of her improbably hectic few days. It was Moody who was reckoned Britain's weakest link. Well, that's not the case at all, judging by her performance, in my view. Dujardin, the country's equal most decorated female Olympian of all time, is a mistress of big events, with a ferocious competitive drive. Without her, the team was reckoned by many observers to be weakened beyond the possibility of gaining a medal. Not that you would have noticed it. At the end of the first round of 10 riders, Moody, poised, straight-backed, elegant, posted the best score to put Britain in the lead with a third of the competition gone. That score from Becky took the pressure off me, said Hester. It meant I could relax a little. It was as well she had scored so highly. The next round saw Hester overtaken by both the Danes and the Germans, whose riders posted huge scores. To be fair, there wasn't that much difference between Carl's performance and the highest scores. And when Lottie Fry went out last for Britain, good as the former world champion was, registering a hefty 79.483 points as she smoothly negotiated her horse through its paces, first the Danes, then the Germans surpassed their efforts. Hester, though, was not complaining. He was delighted that despite losing his long-term training partner, Dujardin, the woman he brought into the sport in the first place, and who then dominated its Olympic medal tables for so long, the Brits were able to deliver a podium performance. Yeah, so we shouldn't just assume that just because Charlotte Dujardin was not there, that they lost a gold medal. That's really important, given how much she contributed, he said. A lot of people thought if she wasn't on the team, we wouldn't medal. It was very important to show that. Yeah, good for them. Though as yet he had not had any congratulatory message from Dujardin. That's because I don't have my phone with me, Hester, the master of diplomacy, explained. I'll sit down later in the evening and take some time with it, and I'll see if she has sent a message. Well, I think he was being very tongue-in-cheek there. On Sunday, all 3 of the British team go in the individual event, which is the freestyle. But their performance, in many ways, against all the odds, means that Britain has now won a medal in all 3 of the equestrian team events at these games, which, despite all the noise, does not suggest a sport in crisis. And the journalist here is Jim White, reporting from Versailles. Then the Telegraph publish a rather more sensational piece titled "Why It Might Be Time to Stop Riding Horses." And as this is such a long article, I will be making a separate video about it because it argues a very strong case for why riding horses should be banned in these modern times. And this is not just competition, although they use competition to make their strongest arguments. This is for all horse riding to be banned. But certainly with dressage in mind, my belief is that if it's the case that those dressage horses which are bred for the sport, highly bred for that specialist activity, if it means that abuse is the only way for their riders to excel in competition, then of course that sport has to go. But there are those who would argue that the sport's governing body could do a lot more to enable the ethical riders that are out there and who can perform to that level should be facilitated, potentially by a change in rules about the tack and equipment, so that we might see the ethical riders coming through and proving that there is no place for the abuse of horses in pure dressage competition. So watch this space.